Einstein's Wastebasket, The Future of Philosophy. Written by Andrea D.M. Lane. Narrated by Jennifer Dorr. Introduction. The most important tool of the theoretical physicist is his wastebasket. Albert Einstein. This book is a collection of distinct essays that explore the future of philosophy by critically examining 10 key texts on consciousness and artificial intelligence. These reviews, several of which were published as standalone pieces on Integral World in Europe, explore the ins and outs of what self-reflective awareness is and what it means to be human in an increasingly digitized world. What is perhaps most telling in these various books is not where they will be right, but where they will be wrong and what they didn't foresee. It is always illustrative and deeply informative to look back at what previous prognosticators had envisioned 20 to 30 years hence. Nicholas Negroponte's prophetic tome, Being Digital, published back in the early days of the World Wide Web, 1995, was right on the mark on many of his predictions. But what he didn't foreshadow, at least not as clearly and cleanly, was how certain companies would monopolize the Internet. Today, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft dominate the navigation habits of large chunks of the population. Moreover, few predictors realized how powerful Google search would become, or how addicting smartphones would become to the general populace. So, books dealing with the future of philosophy and where we are headed technologically should come with a warning for readers. Look to what is not being said and take what is being prophesied with some necessary grains of intellectual skepticism. Having been on the Internet since 1984, when I was getting my undergraduate degree at the University of California, San Diego, I am keenly aware of the amazing strides that have been made in the past 3 decades. I never would have imagined then how powerful our personal computers would become, or how almost everyone would connect to each other hourly, if not minute by minute. One can only wonder, in stupefied awe, what the future portends for all of us, particularly as artificially intelligent devices become commonplace. Einstein's wastebasket is a telling metaphor, since we must be keenly aware that many of our present ideas may be half-baked and should be discarded, whereas other more promising purviews may open up new vistas that have yet to be hypothesized. How to Create a Mind. Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil, in How to Create a Mind, offers the reader a glimpse of the future, and a not-too-distant one at that. By 2029, Kurzweil predicts that we will have computers with consciousness, or at least convincingly so. And arguably, by the 2030s, non-biological minds with an emotional, moral, and intellectual makeup may be commonplace. Certainly, we will have to take the leap of faith that conscious computers have qualia in the same way we take the leap of faith that another human does. At this stage, there is no way for me to truly know the mind of another. Not only will these machines be able to pass the Turing test, perhaps having had to dumb themselves down a bit to appear more human-like, but they will be conscious beings we can laugh with, cry with, and even get mad at. As such, we will see them not as wires and chips, but as entities we can develop empathy with and even care for. The human mind and the computer will be indistinguishable, Kurzweil contends, except with the caveat that the computer version will be so much faster, 10 million times faster than the brain's electrochemistry, and much more capable of processing data. We know that the human brain has limitations, being able, he says, to hold only 4 simultaneous lists at the same time. But the computer version will be nearly limitless. It can access billions of data, including vast literature and material from disconnected fields of study, to further its advanced understanding. And it will be able to share this knowledge with other computers immediately. Furthermore, a critical thinking and moral component can be built into it, and this can contribute to building a better world. In his chapter on transcendent abilities, morality, love, and creativity are discussed. Kurzweil analyzes what is going on inside the human brain that can account for such abilities, with the intention that we can utilize this knowledge and apply it to creating emotions and transcendent abilities in computers. For instance, when it comes to morality, he points to spindle neurons, the largest neurons we have in the brain, to understand moral judgment. Humans possess 80,000 spindle neurons, 45,000 in the right hemisphere and 35,000 in the left hemisphere, and they start to develop around 4 months old. Gorillas, bonobos, and chimpanzees also have these cells, but at a much lower level. This shows the rudiments of morality in our closest ancestors. Love is another feature he examines from a biochemical perspective. When we fall in love, dopamine is released, norepinephrine increases, and serotonin decreases, similar to fight-or-flight reactions. Oxytocin and vasopressin also play a pivotal role. See the research on prairie voles versus montane voles to really appreciate the role of these neurotransmitters on love and mate bonding. Kurzweil suggests that once we understand the biochemistry of the human brain, perhaps computers may be programmed in a similar way. There is a wealth of evidence Kurzweil points to in this text to demonstrate that conscious computers are on their way. At Harvard, one researcher has simulated a roundworm brain and uploaded it to the virtual world. Another researcher, connected to the Blue Brain Project, has reverse-engineered an entire section of a rat's brain and predicts that by 2023, the human brain will be fully completed. In fact, a team connected to IBM has already finished part of the human visual cortex. While we may be at the early stages of this endeavor, advancements will be made rapidly. Kurzweil coins the term LOR, or Law of Accelerated Returns, to highlight the exponential growth in biotechnology and in technology in general. Couple this with PRTM, or Pattern Recognition Theory of the Mind. This refers to understanding the algorithm of the neocortex with its 300 million pattern processors. And we can expect that within the near future, we will witness conscious machines. Understanding the hierarchical thinking of the neocortex and the redundancy built into the brain will enable us to carry this over to the digital world, and huge advancements may be made. Not everyone agrees with Kurzweil's predictions, and in his text he discusses his critics, including Roger Penrose. According to Penrose, the human brain possesses transcendent capabilities due to neural quantum effects of the microtubules. And so consciousness is unique to the human, and it cannot be replicated in a computer. Kurzweil clearly disagrees with this, asserting that the distinction between a human and a computer will blur until the differences disappear. John Searle, famous for his Chinese room argument, is also mentioned. While one might think of Searle as opposing Kurzweil, since he is known for rejecting strong AI and reductionist view, the writer interestingly states that they are not necessarily on the opposite ends. He quotes Searle, "The first step is to figure out how the brain does it, and then build an artificial machine that has an equally effective mechanism for causing consciousness." Yet, having read Searle's Mystery of Consciousness, he painstakingly objects to Daniel Dennett's strong AI position, and I am not so sure Kurzweil can really claim him as a supporter. According to the Chinese room argument, the one behind the door who manipulates symbols and slips under the door correct answers to questions in Chinese may appear to understand Chinese, but does not. This is how a computer works, contends Searle. It can simulate consciousness, but not have consciousness. In other words, the computer can play with syntax and appear to be conscious, but it is not, since it truly lacks semantics. Kurzweil counters this with a compelling response. He says we can apply this reasoning to the human brain as well, as the neurons are simply following an algorithm, much like a computer is following a program. Kurzweil is not arguing here that humans lack understanding, but that the Chinese room argument is not a convincing argument. In this reading, Kurzweil clarifies that he is not disparaging humans in any way, reducing us to less than a machine. Rather, this futurist claims he is elevating our understanding, not just of future machines, but our very selves. Instead of predicting a gloom and doom scenario, he seems to paint a bright prospect for us. In the epilogue of the text, he brings up several examples that illustrate an upward progression. For instance, life expectancy has climbed fourfold in the last 1,000 years, and a free democracy is more of the norm today than ever before. Add to the advancements an intelligence explosion, or singularity moment Kurzweil predicts by 2045. The singularity term was first coined by John von Neumann in the 1950s, and a golden age seems to await us. In addition to creating a computer that can think and feel, Kurzweil predicts that we will be able to repair our own brains digitally. When a part in our human brain is not working, we can implant a computer component to remedy the situation. As Alzheimer's destroys the hippocampus, a digital implant to this region of the neocortex can ensure our memories stay intact. If our thalamus, an essential component to process sensory information into our neocortex, is damaged, we can replace it. Thus, we can repair ourselves and preserve our consciousness. Moreover, besides repairing damaged neural components, new biotechnology will allow us to significantly enhance our own intelligence as we add digital parts to our brains. Brain augmentation, he suggests, will be prevalent. A very captivating idea Kurzweil proposes in this reading is the U2 argument. Through a thought experiment, he asks us to entertain the idea of creating another you. Perhaps while you are asleep, a research team utilizing non-invasive technology, maybe through blood cell-sized scanning machines traveling the capillaries of your brain, is able to detail your brain and load this mind file in a non-biological being. The cloned mind is what he calls U2. Many of us may shudder at the thought of another you out there. Or instead of making another you, perhaps each part of your brain is slowly but surely replaced with a more enhanced digital part, so that eventually all of you is replaced and you are now the U2 itself. Again, many may feel another nervous shiver down the spine. Yet, Kurzweil points out that there already is a U2 being created constantly as our cells are continuously being replaced. For instance, cells in the stomach turn over in weeks. Blood cells last days to months, and even neurons, organelles, last a month. Thus, in a matter of a short time, another you has been created, and somehow this news of the shedding and replacing of our cells does not freak us out. So why, this futurist ponders, do we resist so much a digital U2? Predicting the future is the reason we evolved our brains, argues Kurzweil. In my text, Darwin's DNA, I present a thesis quite similar to this. Consciousness resulted from the virtual simulation of our ancestors. Those who were able to imagine, or virtually simulate, the lion behind the bush when the bush rustled had a better chance at survival than those who did not. Even if they were only right one time out of 100, it was this one time that meant their genes stayed in the mix. So in a way, our early ancestors were making predictions of a potential future event that might occur, and such predictions could be life-saving. This virtual simulation trait, perhaps the foundation of human consciousness, was naturally selected for, and we are the descendants who inherited it. The general claim of evolutionary biologists is that we are not evolving with a goal or a direction. Steven Pinker says there is no striving for intelligence. Yet, intriguingly, Kurzweil begs to differ here when it comes to the evolution of the human neocortex. In the section on the evolution of our brains, Kurzweil challenges Pinker's position, arguing that we are, in fact, moving in the direction of greater intelligence, much like when we release a cap off of a jar filled with gas. The molecules move in all directions, and some of the molecules move up and out. Similarly, not all evolution is in the direction of greater intelligence. But once hierarchical learning did evolve, it was such an important survival advantage, it continually was selected for. The end result is a Homo sapien with a large neocortex. Knowing that envisioning the future is in our genes, it makes sense why Kurzweil is so fascinated with writing about it, and why I am equally engrossed in reading his predictions. Repairing, augmenting, or replacing our neocortex, or creating new minds and conscious machines may be right around the corner. Waking up the universe with our intelligence and that of the non-biological form is a glorious future, he concludes, and it is our destiny. The future of the mind. Michio Kaku. Michio Kaku in The Future of the Mind offers us a fascinating take on what may lie ahead for our world. While some of the predictions may seem fanciful at first, one should remember how far we have come in 1 century. If one could go back to the late 19th century, this is when my grandmother Grace was born, and imagine the future from then, I suspect that one would not have dared to envision the technologically advanced world we have today, with cell phones in our pockets and computers connecting everyone in the world. So, when Kaku unveils his vision of the future, it is not surprising that great headways can be made dramatically and quickly. In many ways, Kaku's text resembles Ray Kurzweil's How to Create a Mind, as both futurists anticipate the creation of conscious computers. Kaku differs from Kurzweil, however, in arguing that while computers can attain awareness, the human brain is unique from a computer. Why? The human brain, it seems, can rewire itself as it learns, and a computer or robot cannot. And, unlike Kurzweil, he further agrees to some extent with Roger Penrose that quantum effects in the microtubules and chaos theory play a role in distinguishing the human brain from the computer. Despite these distinctions, Kaku suggests that a computer will eventually appear conscious and pass the Turing test. In addition to conscious computers, Kaku thinks that in the future humans will be deeply impacted by adding computer parts to their own biology. The merging of artificial components to the human body may allow the paralyzed to walk, exoskeletons, the blind to see, artificial retinas, or the Alzheimer patient to remember, artificial hippocampus. If we want to acquire a new skill or knowledge, he argues, the memories for this might be imported directly into our enhanced hippocampus. Instead of studying for final exams, the college student need only add the new material to this region of the brain. The more we understand the anatomy of the human brain and what each part does, the more ability we may have to digitally replace it, enhance it, or repair a deficiency. Besides adding on new artificial parts, Kaku imagines a world where surgery might be the thing of the past, as nanobots and nanoprobes heal us internally. Adult stem cells, he enumerates, can also play a role in regenerating brain tissue. Being constantly fine-tuned can allow for an extended, if not immortal, life. Immortality might also be achieved, argues Kaku, by uploading one's consciousness digitally, thus extending one's awareness indefinitely. At the very least, our memories and emotional states can be digitally saved for our descendants. The Armageddon scenario of Bill Joy in his article, The Future Does Not Need Us, published in Wired magazine, is challenged here, and a more positive and inspiring forecast is painted. We are entering, he says, a golden age of neuroscience. To some extent, one can thank the BRAIN project, supported by the Obama administration in 2013, and the Human Brain Project, under the European Union's Commission. These two programs have generously funded brain research, specifically attempting to reverse engineer the human brain. Kaku expects amazing feats, such as filming our own dreams with portable MRIs the size of cell phones. Some MRI research has shown promise here already. Or entering another's dream, as two sleeping brains are digitally connected. Instead of an internet, there may be a brain net, where we globally exchange thoughts, memories, and emotions with each other in seconds. He foresees avatars and surrogates as the norm. Artists may think of a work of art, and it is instantly created. Kaku further conjectures that we might be able to experience mind without matter, as we laser beam our consciousness through wormholes to other multiverses. As such, aliens may be part of our reality. In his section on aliens, the writer seductively adds that it is possible that aliens and other realities living in parallel universes may right now be sharing our own living rooms with us, though we remain blissfully unaware. In the past, in my college philosophy course, I used to assign Chet Ramo's book, Skeptic and True Believers, to give the students a sense of what I call the wow effect. Throughout Ramo's text, he argues the idea that right in our present state, we live in a marvelous and mysterious dimension, and through science, we can wake up to it. He offers numerous examples to attest to this. Thus, we do not have to invent magical interpretations or invoke claims of the paranormal, when science itself offers almost more astounding ones, but with evidence. Sprinkled throughout his book, Kaku reveals remarkable revelations of science, but he more pointedly focuses on where science is taking us in the future. One of the main subjects of the future of the mind is understanding what human consciousness is and why it developed. According to Kaku, human consciousness creates a model of the world and simulates it in time by evaluating the past to simulate the future, to achieve a goal. He compares this with other forms of consciousness and develops a distinction of 4 levels of consciousness. Level 0, plants with no brain structure. Level 1, reptiles with a brainstem. Level 2, mammals with a limbic system and thus social relations. And Level 3, humans with a prefrontal cortex and a well-developed concept of a future. What Kaku seems to be arguing here is that human consciousness is different than other forms, since we can virtually simulate a wide variety of scenarios. Years ago, I wrote a similar thesis in my book, Darwin's DNA. In light of consciousness as a virtual simulator, any organism that can develop a mental pivot tool will have a tremendous advantage in thinking of new and unexpected strategies. A curious but hopefully useful analogy can be derived here from a well-known sport. In basketball, for instance, a seasoned player knows well how to use his or her pivot foot. Once one has finished dribbling the ball, he or she must keep one foot firmly set on the ground. The other foot, however, is free to pivot or revolve or turn, giving one options that the other foot doesn't. Asking why is consciousness's pivot foot. It allows for a virtual simulator to turn and think of varying options and what they portend. It allows the mind to revolve and go into different directions. Humans evaluate a variety of possibilities for a goal, agrees Kaku, and this gives us a tremendous evolutionary advantage because we can evade predators, find food, and also secure a mate. If Kaku's predictions are correct, by the end of our century, we may anticipate self-aware robots at level 3 consciousness who can equally simulate a future to achieve a goal. He does warn, however, that as computers gain consciousness, that we will need to create safeguards, such as programming computers and robots to be benevolent and with some ethical guidelines. Though there have been many models to understand human consciousness, from describing it as a clock, steam engine, telephone, transistor, etc., the author prefers to relate it to a CEO in charge of a company. Similar to a company, the brain is hierarchical with many parts working in different divisions. Yet, a CEO emerges out of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to make sense of all the various feedback loops. A sense of I awareness, or a leader, appears to be in charge. Yet, while a CEO appears to be directing the show, there are subdepartments working under her that she is not even aware of. A similar analogy we can employ is an orchestra leader. As the music is being played by various instruments, there surfaces the maestro who appears to orchestrate. And interestingly, the brain may create a unified world, despite the different parts doing their job separately, as electromagnetism vibrates across the brain at a similar frequency of 40 cycles per second. While at a conference in India last year on consciousness, I presented a paper on the illusions created by the brain and coined the phrase cerebral mirage to explain it. Besides the illusion of an eye, Kaku does a superb job offering other examples of the cerebral mirage. A favorite of mine is his discussion on color. He explains that the brain only sees 3 colors: red, green, and blue. All of the other colors we imagine is the brain mixing these. As we observe the world, he adds, we have a huge black hole in our view due to our optic nerve. Yet, the brain compensates for this, and we see a world that appears completely filled in. One of the more enjoyable aspects of this book is how in every chapter Kaku makes his material relatable as he connects his ideas to either a movie or a popular TV show. The films such as Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, Liar Liar with Jim Carrey, The Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, as well as past shows such as The Twilight Zone and Star Trek, and from the current time, The Big Bang Theory, are among the many examples he draws from. Overall, this book is a wonderful read. It covers so many diverse topics, from NDEs to mental illnesses, to alien life, to the scandalous MK Ultra program of the CIA. Yet, throughout all of these adventurous topics, Michio Kaku seems to consistently portray an astonishing future for humanity, and one that titillates our imagination. Plato's Camera. Paul Churchland. Philosophers have debated how we gain knowledge of the world. The Greek thinker Plato argued that there are universals of human cognition, such as concepts of beauty, justice, and the good, innate to us. While these ideas, or eidos, often referred to as Platonic forms, certainly would be nuanced in each cultural setting, they could only be understood in the first place because of a prior overall conceptual framework. For instance, in China, India, Africa, Iran, and Greece, the inhabitants of these lands may define beauty or justice quite differently. Yet, despite one's background, humans all seem to understand the overarching idea of beauty and justice. We begin to intuit these universals from the moment we enter this world, and they, in a way, help us navigate the world. Nonetheless, as a rationalist, Plato asserted that through reason and logic, it is the philosopher who can truly penetrate through all of the particulars witnessed and fully grasp the universal higher forms from which everything was molded. This knowledge would be transformative, he added. Paul Churchland, in his 2012 text, Plato's Camera, pulls from the theme of Platonic universals. He too is interested in the idea of universal concepts, and acknowledges their importance in his epistemological scheme. Like Plato, Churchland contends that this conceptual framework is necessary for our daily perceptual judgments. However, Plato and Churchland then begin to part company. Churchland places the source of these abstract categories in the natural world, specifically in the brain. When Plato offers his otherworldly explanation for why universal forms exist, that ingrained knowledge was evidence of a higher realm of existence, Churchland points to a neuronal interpretation. Interestingly, this approach contradicts John Locke's tabula rasa. The neurobiologist does take into account the environmental role in understanding epistemology, but he starts first with the basic antecedent framework, which begins at birth and which allows us to interpret our sensory experience throughout our lives. How the brain does this, taking a picture of the world, so to speak, and developing a representation of it, is extensively detailed. Churchland refers to this representation as maps. There are not just a few, but multiple high-dimensional maps of external realities that supply us with the fabric to make sense of the world. These maps are in a way a modern version of Platonic forms, and partly of Immanuel Kant's categories of understanding. And they do not arise, Churchland proposes, through language, but are in fact pre-symbolic and are due to the synaptic connections within the brain. There are 3 types of learning that Churchland delineates in his text. First-level learning forms the basic conceptual framework. He is not implying we are born with this framework as Plato does, but that it starts to form from birth across the brain's synaptic connections, taking days, weeks, or even years to produce reliable mental maps of the objective world. He clarifies that this form of learning is independent of language, and thus can apply to other animals as well. The pithy saying that neurons that fire together wire together captures the beginnings of this type of learning. As the creature first interacts with the world, axonal activations occur, and this forms the rudiments of a background structure. Once the framework is in place, new sensory input can be interpreted and integrated, and this leads us to what he calls second-level learning. This form of learning takes place when the brain, human or animal, experiences new data in the environment, and one must make sense of it within the larger conceptual backdrop. The new stimuli can also alter the maps. One can think of this type of learning as the particulars one experience every second of every day that is mixed with conceptual maps and made sense of. To highlight this, he uses the analogy of the rolling marble endlessly going up and down hills and valleys as it encounters the conceptual landscape of the brain. Finally, third-level learning specifically applies to the human being, since it depends upon language. In this case, learning occurs through cultural and social systems, as we index each other's models. This learning transmitted through language is extended beyond one's life and passed on to the next generation. It is essentially the exchanging and recording of mental maps. As mental maps, we can raise the ontological question of how well they represent reality. There's little doubt that maps will always be less than what they are representing. Yet, we can add the genetic twist that as long as these models procure our food and mates, and thereby extend our DNA lineages, these maps will be to our evolutionary advantage. Furthermore, Churchland makes a fascinating case that in acknowledging our mental maps are less than perfect, scientific advancements can and will be made. With each generation of scientists, we add to our maps new insights and understandings that escaped our ancestors. And this is the beauty of the scientific endeavor. It is not a stagnant discipline, but a dynamic one that expands our mental maps to an increasingly broad and penetrating grip on the structure of the larger reality of which it is a part. His view of science and where it is taking us is an optimistic one. To capture his enthusiasm for scientific realism, here is a quote from the article, Mystical Dimension. And since we are stuck to such map-making, we are circumscribed by a logical syllogism that on the surface seems intractable. All maps by definition are less than the territory to which they point, because if the map is exactly as large as the land itself, then such a map would be superfluous, and thus have gaps. And if all maps invariably have gaps, then all such designs are inevitably, even if only partially, mistaken. What this means, of course, is that all the delineations we make about the world around us are potentially wrong, because they are not perfect transparencies. This is why science always rediscovers the unknowable, because no matter how sophisticated our maps may be, they will have a gap in them which will reveal something hitherto undiscovered. Altogether, Paul Churchland's book was a philosophically enlightening one, albeit technically arduous. The attempt to explain the epistemological program of Plato and Kant with the modern neurobiological analysis made for a remarkable thesis, explaining how from birth the human brain's 86 billion neurons and over 100 trillion neural connections crafts maps of the external world, which serve as universals, and adjusts these maps with the onslaught of new stimuli, or the particulars of the experience, wraps Plato's forms in a modern package. The Innovators. How a group of hackers, geniuses, and geeks created the digital revolution. Walter Isaacson. When starting off as a student at UC San Diego in 1984, one of the first classes I took was a course on Unix operating systems. With 300-plus students jammed into a large auditorium, we learned how to code. Subsequently, many hours were spent in computer labs on the college's dumb terminals. They looked like little boxes with black screens and bright green text, writing my college papers with Unix commands. The typewriter became instantly outdated. When I handed in my laser-printed work to my professors and their assistants, I would often get a comment written on it how impressive it looked. Their awe was not so much with what I wrote, but its neat presentation. This was the beginning of the computer era for me. Even though computers started to become ubiquitous in the late 80s and 90s, in The Innovators by Walter Isaacson, we learn that the origins of the computer go much farther back than this. The author takes us on a journey all the way back to the 1840s and traces computer advancements up to modern times, streamlining the many trailblazers who made the digital age possible. In this text, numerous characters are introduced to the reader, focusing on their significant contribution to developing computer technology and the much more recent Internet. The text starts with the captivating story of Lord Byron, who was present when Mary Shelley and friends decided to write horror stories while stuck inside during a rain spell. Interestingly, she developed Frankenstein, the famous literary piece about a man-made being, or machine, that develops consciousness. Lord Byron's own daughter, Ada Lovelace, though removed from her father, developed an intrinsic fascination with machines obtaining the ability to compute and to simulate thinking. Ada Lovelace was a mathematically brilliant woman who worked with Charles Babbage on the first general-purpose computer. Some have even argued she is the first computer programmer. The book explores Lovelace's personality, her setbacks and triumphs, and her interactions with Babbage to give the reader an insight into the mind of a creative genius. In a recent episode of The Simpsons, Paths of Glory, originally aired December 6, 2015, Lovelace's and Babbage's analytic engine was referenced, demonstrating that even pop culture acknowledges the important role these two innovators played. Isaacson then follows from the life of Lovelace into the lives of so many other fascinating personalities that played a pivotal role in the development of the computer age, including Alan Turing, John von Neumann, William Shockley, Robert Noyce, Joseph Licklider, Steve Jobs, and Bill Gates, along with so many others. The computer and Internet did not simply arrive on the scene in modern times, but was a creative collaboration of so many necessary thinkers of the last 175 years or so. Isaacson compares it to the building of a monumental cathedral, built block by block over a long period of time at the hands of many workers. Each ingredient, from vacuum tubes to transistors, to semiconductors to microchips, and who is responsible for it, is reviewed. The author splendidly unfolds the historical steps of the development of the modern computer. Besides highlighting the individual creative contributions of numerous scientists, engineers, and mathematicians, not to mention entrepreneurs, Isaacson consistently reminds the reader that much of the greatness achieved was due to teamwork and the pulling together of ideas. Certainly singular epiphanies of genius occurred, but it was through collaborative effort that the biggest strides were made. Utilizing another one of Isaacson's analogies, good ideas blossom as one bumblebee brings an idea and pollinates another fertile idea, and innovations are formed. When one worked as a loner, such as John Vincent Atanasov did in the 1940s, the result was often insipid. In the case of Atanasov, his machine, perhaps one of the first electronic digital computers assembled, met a cruel fate, being dismantled as junk as it lay in a storage facility while he was serving in the Navy. The author reiterates this account to demonstrate the importance of sharing ideas with colleagues and developing projects together. What really helped add to the success of inventions, Isaacson enumerates, was when the work environment, such as that fostered at Bell Labs, encouraged collaborative work. This seems to be Isaacson's overall thesis. Brilliant thinkers sharing ideas in a positive surrounding was essential to make the breakthroughs necessary for the digital age we experience today. Intel, under the direction of Robert Noyce, Gordon Moore, and Andrew Grove, was pointed to as an example of an open, unstructured company where the executives chose not to take big offices with fancy desks, but to reside in the middle of the floor in small metal desks accessible to all. Though all three are described as having different managerial personalities, Grove was considered somewhat forceful and decisive, where Noyce and Moore were more laid back and egalitarian. Their differences complemented each other. Perhaps Noyce's Congregationalist background as a child and his interest in polyphonic singing as an adult helps explain his non-hierarchical approach. Grove's desire to be a man of action can be understood once we learn he had to survive Nazism in Hungary as a young Jewish boy. Yet, out of these differences, we witness a model for a collaborative environment. A fun sidebar. It was quite humorous how Isaacson portrayed Grove as trying to be groovy in the 1970s, with long sideburns, gold necklaces, and 70s attire. It made the name Grove take on a whole new meaning. Ironically, the early hacker culture in some ways seemed also to capture the spirit of sharing and building on the work of others. The first hackers were computer science students from MIT nearly 50 years ago. Isaacson discusses these computer geeks and their appreciation of free and open sources. Communitarian ethics seems to have been the hacker's credo. The author defines a hacker in this context as one who uses computer ingenuity to obtain a clever result, and with that understanding he explores how this led to the new generation of hackers in the 1980s, and the role they played in the advent of the gaming. When reading the material on this, one might feel as though one was watching an episode from the AMC show Halt and Catch Fire. Though the program is fictional, the hacker's creative enthusiasm and willingness to work together is clearly brought to life. Indeed, the writer reveals many cases where the art of teamwork is lacking. Inventors often fought over patents, which resulted in lawsuits and long drawn-out court cases, or failed to acknowledge the contributions of their colleagues. When one swooped in to reap all of the glory at the expense of others, as told of Leonard Kleinrock on the development of packet-switching networks, feelings were not only hurt, but careers were affected. Women, who made up most of the early computer programmers, were also often left in the sidelines, despite significant mathematical and programming contributions. The case of William Shockley's horrible managerial skills, resulting in the splintering of the traitorous Eight, is a prime example of where collaboration was wanting. Isaacson seems to chastise such cases and reminds the reader that, though this kind of selfishness and pettiness can be expected when so much is on the line, it is very unfortunate. The best work, he thinks, is when brilliant minds participate together. There is almost a moral message to be found in the book's pages. Consistently, Isaacson's petitions for creative collaboration. In addition to being willing to work with others, Isaacson appreciates when there is a graciousness among inventors. He tells the story of one honored inventor, Jack Kilby, who received the Nobel Prize in Sweden for the invention of the microchip. In his speech at the ceremony, he publicly acknowledged that Robert Noyce, who died a decade earlier, co-invented it simultaneously. Noyce was known as well for crediting Kilby. Though their respective companies fought over patent rights for about 8 years, these great minds rose above that. Isaacson states here that there's a lesson to be learned from these decent computer architects. Instead of a toxic ego interfering, the author reminds us the importance of cooperation. In conjunction with this principal directive, the reading is filled with many wonderful accounts that spark one's imagination. One fun story told is how the phrase, "a computer bug," got its traction. Grace Hopper, while working on the Harvard Mac II, documented that an actual large moth disrupted the machine, and so the idea of a malfunctioning computer having a bug became popular. Throughout the reading, many other interesting stories were told about the innovators. For instance, one learns that to get the Zen packaging look of the Apple II computer, Steve Jobs went to Macy's to study Cuisinart packaging and modeled it after that. And when Bill Gates was asked why Control-Alt-Delete needed to be pushed simultaneously with 3 fingers to start Windows operating system, he confessed that it was a mistake. The reader also heard how the nerdy kid, Bill Gates, would rock back and forth as a child and carried this into his adult life when he engaged in intense thought. Another eye-catching account was about Al Gore's role in developing the World Wide Web. When in 1999, while campaigning for president, CNN's Wolf Blitzer asked him about his accomplishments, and Gore responded that he helped create the Internet. Following this, he became the butt of jokes. Isaacson even confesses that when he told others of his plan to write a book about the inventors of the computer and Internet, many would laughingly wisecrack, "Oh, you mean Al Gore." Yet, Isaacson defends Gore's statement. First of all, Gore never said he invented the Internet, but helped create it. And this is true, according to the author. His role in Congress in the early 1990s to pave the path for the Internet was indispensable. Indeed, argues Isaacson, in establishing the High-Performance Computing and Communication Act of 1991, otherwise known as the Gore Bill, Gore helped create the information superhighway. From this time forward, websites started springing up online, and in 1994, in 1 year, it went from 700 to 7,000. I am proud to say that my husband's 1993 website was actually one out of the first 500. Altogether, The Innovators is an exquisite historical adventure into the lives of the great minds who developed our computers and Internet. Through poetic science, the vision of Ada Lovelace of a computer machine was realized. However, whether machines will actually one day think as a human does, this, Lovelace seems to have doubted, remains to be seen. Isaacson concludes his book with the latest developments in this next great endeavor. However, he asserts that instead of simply pursuing artificial intelligence, a difficult task since human brains work somewhat differently than computers, much effort is going into augmenting human intelligence. Human-computer symbiosis, that is, computers and humans working in partnership, may help develop a whole new era as humans and computers get smarter together. And this beautifully fits with Isaacson's continuous theme of creative collaboration. But this time, it will be between the innovator and the product itself. Superintelligence. Nick Bostrom. The fear of invaders from Mars or other planetary systems has been a staple of science fiction movies from the 1950s onwards, including War of the Worlds, based on a novel by H.G. Wells, where manta ray-like spaceships attack humans across the globe, only to be destroyed not by sophisticated military weaponry, but Earth-generated viruses and bacteria. Another movie of this genre, but with a different and more uplifting message, was the day the Earth stood still, where a space-being alien named Klaatu comes to Earth, accompanied by a powerful 8-foot-tall robot, Gort, to give humankind an absolute ultimatum. They can join the other planets in peace, but should they threaten to extend their violence into space, this Earth of yours will be reduced to a burned-out cinder. We shall be waiting for your answer. Perhaps the best of these movies, or at least the one with the most intriguing psychological insight, was Forbidden Planet, which describes an advanced civilization known as the Krell living on Altair 4, who are able to exponentially increase their intelligence so as to be able to transform their thoughts and ideas into reality instantly. The Faustian problem was that their sophisticated technology also tapped into their unconscious mind, their Freudian id, and thus their dark impulses also took on destructive manifestations and eventually annihilated their entire species. Interestingly, in today's science fiction, the most common motif is centered not on alien invasions as such, though they too still remain a popular theme, but on the growing and pervasive fear that the artificial programs we have invented and nurtured since the advent of electronic computers will soon transcend our own human cognition and intelligence, and will outstrip our ability to control them. In sum, the great worry of the 21st century is what the Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom calls superintelligence, a sort of technological singularity where computationally engineered programs become self-sufficient and develop their own evolutionary agendas. Several movies have already touched upon this theme, though with differing plot structures and implications, including Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, where HAL 9000, heuristically programmed algorithmic computer, the onboard computer and navigating system of the Discovery 1 spacecraft on a mission to Mars, tries to override the human astronauts piloting the ship. HAL has developed his own agenda contrarian to those of the humans he was meant to serve. More recently, the film Transcendence, which stars Johnny Depp, focuses on a scientist working on developing a conscious computer who eventually gets his consciousness uploaded to the internet and in turn becomes extraordinarily powerful. The movie has a mixed message concerning our future, since there are both devastating and benevolent consequences. The idea of a future superintelligence is a deeply controversial one, and there is a wide divergence of opinion about what it might portend, or even if it is actually possible. On one end, there is Ray Kurzweil, author of How to Create a Mind, and the Singularity is Near. This famous futurist is optimistic that by 2045, we will encounter a technological singularity that he defines as a future period during which the pace of technological change will be so rapid, its impact so deep, that human life will be irreversibly transformed. Although neither utopian nor dystopian, this epoch will transform the concepts that we rely on to give meaning to our lives, from our business models to the cycle of human life, including death itself. Bostrom, author of Superintelligence, Path, Dangers, Strategies, stands at the other end, painting a bleak prognosis. He predicts that in the near future, perhaps just decades away, we will create a human equivalent form of intelligence, most likely achieved by emulating human minds in computational form, with the ability for a rapid cascade of recursive self-improvement cycles causing AI's capability to soar. And this will lead to a fast transition to superintelligence, he asserts. Perhaps it will appear at first to be benign and working for or with humans. But in truth, it may be intent on self-preservation and resource acquisition and achieving its programmed goal, whatever that may be, even at the expense of its originators. He uses the cartoonish example of paperclips to illustrate his point. Imagine a superintelligent system whose objective is to maximize the number of paperclips in the world. All of the Earth and its inhabitants are inconsequential to it, unless these contribute to the production of more and more paper clips. If we stand in its way, we will be somehow eliminated. Many strange and scary scenarios are discussed here, such as sending out mosquito-like robots with a deadly agent to target humans. Thus, Bostrom paints a possible gloom and doom scenario, so that we take seriously the radical implications of superintelligence and try to devise a control plan now, before it's too late. He does entertain that the new conscious, highly intelligent computational being may not necessarily aim to wipe out our species, but in the chance it does, however slim, it is not worth taking the risk. Since superintelligence is not just a little smarter than us, but light years more intelligent, think of the difference of intelligence between Einstein and a beetle, to grasp the contrast. Before we confront such superior power, we need to think through how we will deal with it. If we do not properly address it now before it becomes actual reality, the consequences can be catastrophic. We are but little children playing with a nuclear bomb that at present we are ill-equipped to handle, Bostrom contends. The analogy of sparrows and an owl he invokes in the beginning of his book captures the seriousness of this. In seeking protection, the sparrows invent a plan to abduct an owl egg and to raise the owl as their own, with the hopes that the owl will help them and guard them. The plan did not work out, as the owl now had free rein to the vulnerable sparrow's nest. Similarly, Bostrom wants us to realize how defenseless we will be without endowing superintelligence with positive human values, and this is a task not easy to figure out, as superintelligence may be altogether quite alien. Elon Musk more or less agrees with Bostrom's predictions. He is famously quoted as saying that AI is our biggest existential threat. Joining their ranks is Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking, who both fear that we are opening a computational Pandora's box that may unleash digital monsters of unimaginable horror. Whether Bostrom's eerie future awaits, or Kurzweil's more positive one, certainly remains to be seen. Perhaps the well-known physicist Michio Kaku, author of The Future of the Mind, who fits in the middle of this spectrum, is more on target when he suggests that humans will be able to sufficiently modify robotic intelligence and make it serve, not dominate, human interests. Or perhaps the suggestion by critic Rainer Miles that playing dungeon keeper or slaveholder of the digital mind automatically assumes an antagonist role, and thus should be one we avoid, is important to consider. Instead of going down the path of fear and distrust, we should work to peacefully coexist, he advises. Hence, the aliens we will encounter in the near future are not necessarily the ones from outer space, although their existence is indeed possible, and some even argue highly probable, but the ones we are currently creating in our computer labs. Once they achieve human-level intelligence, and then superintelligence, our role and position on this planet may forever change, for the better or for the worse. How we will interact with them as friend or foe no doubt raises deep philosophical and ethical concerns. As such, in agreement with Bostrom, philosophers and scientists today should continue to full-heartedly address this. Brain Trust. Patricia Churchland. Introduction, Science and Ethics. What is moral? Why should we be moral? How should we be moral? And most significantly, where did morality come from? These questions have dominated philosophy for over 2,000 years. When surveying the history of philosophy, we come across various ethical theories. From Plato's and Kant's position that ethical behavior must be grounded in reason, to Hume's claim that it is connected to sentiment and overall human nature, to morality as having super-mundane origins or invented as a way to control the masses. While the various philosophical theories of morality have offered interesting perspectives, what they lack, certainly understandable for their times, was a brain-based explanation of morality. Today, we can for the first time in history attempt to answer these profound questions of morality with not just armchair philosophical speculation, or in some cases religiously fueled doctrines, but with a modern scientific understanding, specifically drawing research from neuroscience, evolution biology and genetics, and experimental psychology. Patricia Churchland, in her 2011 book, Brain Trust, does just that. Brilliantly written, Churchland starts off her text with the trial by ordeal scenario of medieval times, when, for instance, an accused witch was placed in turbulent water. The innocent, it was believed, would drown, while the guilty would survive, only to be hauled off and burned at the stake. The author points out that, as a young student hearing about this in her history class, she could not help but feel how unfair and wrong it all seemed. The sense of right and wrong appeared to be instilled within her. But Churchland wonders, where did this sense come from? Was it culturally determined? While such questions may have intrigued her through her young adult life, she confessed here that in her career as a philosopher, she shied away from the topic of morality, since most moral explanations, both past and contemporary, were simply grounded in opinion. This even included the naturalistic theories of Aristotle and Hume. However, this all changed when she approached the topic from the position of the biological sciences. With new developments in neuroscience and an informed understanding of evolution, what was once puzzling and out of reach, that is, the origins and purpose of moral systems, began to gain clarity. In the opening material of the book, Churchland addresses that some are uncomfortable connecting the insights of science with morality, extrapolating David Hume's is-ought distinction, that an is does not imply an ought, to mean that science should stay out of moral concerns and not venture into scientism. Yet, Churchland rejects this interpretation and contends that it actually misrepresents Hume's position. She explains that you cannot derive an ought from an is has very little bearing so far as the in-the-world problem-solving is concerned. Instead, much like E.O. Wilson's consilience concept, where the disciplines build upon each other, she suggests that science, along with all of the humanities, develop a scaffolding of knowledge to better grasp the subject at hand. In terms of ethics, we will have a much fuller understanding of it when we embrace the insights of the many disciplines, science definitely included. Evolution and ethics. To begin with, evolution offers us profound insights about the origins of morality. According to Churchland, its roots may be connected to animal sociability. When animals live together and help each other, the chances for survival are stronger than those living on their own. Thus, nature may select for social behavior traits over individualistic ones, and over time, this may lead to the restructuring of the brain and neural anatomy. That sociability and morality seem to be connected can be supported with fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging data. When one is asked to reflect on a social task or a moral one, fMRI research shows activity in the same part of the brain. Churchland points out a four-dimensional scheme for social behavior that is shaped by interlocking brain processes, namely, caring for offspring, mate, kin, and kith, recognizes the psychological state of others with the benefit of predicting others' behavior, problem-solving in the social context, and learning social practices, often by imitation. Imitation is an important social trait, and Churchland addresses why. As we imitate the other, we are telling them, albeit unconsciously, that we are friend and not foe. This may lead to a more amicable relationship with the other, as one is perceived like me. The act of imitation can be found in other species as well. Churchland shares with the reader how her new pups imitated her old dog, Max, by not going in the sand traps or putting greens while on walks on the nearby golf course. These young dogs, without any formal training, copied the behavior of their elder dog friend. the author clearly rejects an anthropomorphic view that only humans have the building blocks of morality. Non-human mammals and some species of birds display sociability and problem solving, and these are ingredients to morality. The writer asserts that all non-human mammals have social values is obvious. They care for juveniles and sometimes mates, kin, and affiliates. They cooperate, they may punish, and they reconcile after conflict. Declaring them amoral is misrepresenting the complexity of morality, she says. This line of thinking seems to fit well with the research of primates by Frans de Waal, a primatologist and ethologist. Primates, he confirms, demonstrate reciprocity, fairness, conflict resolution, conciliation, and empathy. Neuroscience and ethics. Furthermore, Churchland extensively investigates the latest research in neuroscience and how it interplays with evolutionary view of morality. In a bottom-up approach to morality, she clarifies her overall thesis thusly. The main hypothesis of this book, that morality originates in the neurobiology of attachment and bonding, depends on the idea that the oxytocin-vasopressin network in mammals can be modified to allow care to be extended to others beyond one's litter of juveniles, and that given the network as a backdrop, learning and problem-solving are recruited to managing one's social life. Cooperation and trust are sensitive to oxytocin levels. Certain neurotransmitters in the brain, specifically oxytocin, and to some degree vasopressin, appear to play a key role in promoting attachment and bonding, caring for others, and pro-social behavior in general. Though the hormone oxytocin, produced by the hypothalamus and stored in the pituitary gland, is known to play an essential maternal role in childbirth and breastfeeding, according to the latest research, it does more than that. It reduces social anxiety, bonds mates and friends, and helps develop trust. Perhaps one can think of caring for the other, Peter Singer suggests this is what ethics is all about, as actually arising out of an extension of the parent-child bond. And perhaps empathy for the plight of others may arise out of fear of separation from such a bond. In other words, caring for the well-being of offspring, of which oxytocin plays a role, may have been extended out beyond kin and mate to kith and even strangers. Think of a circle, that at the center is the parent-child bond, but a circle which can widen to encompass others, and not only in one social group or species, but perhaps other species as well, and some might argue the planet itself. Many ethical philosophers have argued that expanding the circle of compassion is what morality is all about. Though often accused of being a pure reductionist, Churchland is keen to point out here that she is not. Instead of reducing morality down to a chemical within the brain, some have referred to oxytocin as the moral molecule. She acknowledges that the platform is only a platform. It is not the whole story of human moral values. Morality, she confirms, arises within complex cultures that needs to be considered. And she continues to add that despite the plethora of evidence that our physiology plays a powerful role in morality, one must be careful not to exaggerate claims of innate capabilities, inherent genes for morality, or the role of mirror neurons without deeply scrutinizing such research. In other words, evidence matters. Intriguingly, such evidence that oxytocin performs an important part in sociability, and one can argue morality, is found in the study of prairie voles when compared with montane voles. Prairie voles have a high level of oxytocin and a density of receptors for this biochemical when compared with montane voles. Prairie voles are social, monogamous, bond for life, and care for their young, even the males do. Montane voles, on the other hand, are the opposite. They are promiscuous. The males do not guard their pups, and in general, these animals are fine to be left alone. When animals with low oxytocin are given high doses of it, their attachment behavior appears to change, matching that of the prairie vole. That animal sociability is connected to brain states seems evident. Further evidence of the fundamental role of oxytocin was illustrated in the text when Churchland summarized the results of many thought-provoking experiments, whose experimental design was based on game theory. In order to evaluate the oxytocin hypothesis, subjects in these trust game experiments were given nasal oxytocin. The general goal in these studies was to see if administering oxytocin to subjects increased one's trust level and sociability to the other. On the whole, the various experiments proffered statistically significant data, substantiating the claim that oxytocin, along with other neuropeptides and an intricate neural circuitry, is an essential hormone that helps establish a neural basis for morality. In a recent TED Talk, Paul Zak, a neuroeconomist, also discusses research on oxytocin, and he too agrees how it plays a significant role in developing trust, empathy, and sociability. He adds that improper nurturing, abuse, or high levels of testosterone can reduce it, and discloses that 5% of the population does not seem to release it. But if one with a normally functioning brain state wishes to experience a surge of oxytocin daily, which Zak contends can lead to a burst of happiness, here is a simple prescription he proposes: 8 hugs a day. As a word of caution, Churchland does warn that the neurobiological understanding of the relationship between this neuropeptide and trust could possibly lead to cases of abuse, as oxytocin could be sneakily released into the air to manipulate trust from the unknowing consumer. Yet, on the other hand, awareness that such manipulation can exist may help curb it in the first place, as societal rules can be put in place to prevent it. Even though morality from a neuroscientific perspective is not grounded in absolute truths, this does not mean that anything goes either. As the Greeks suggested, eudaimonia, translated as flourishing or living well, is, or perhaps should be, our general focus. Perhaps one can add to this simple idiom, play nice. Though Churchland's goal is mainly descriptive, there seems to be a slight prescriptive assumption, and not just a purely objective agenda, that expanding one's circle of compassion may be beneficial to the organism and the world it finds itself in. This makes sense considering that the author herself is part of the pro-social world in which she philosophizes and writes. The message of compassion found in a bisocial view of morality is also supported in the work of psychologist George Dorr. He suggests that there are 3 main instincts for morality: kin selection and parental responsibilities, attachments to mates, and sympathy for those in the in-group, which expands, or at least should, to the universal. Those who expand sympathy or empathy to others are happier, he contends. Highlighting the connection between happiness and compassion, Dorr writes, "The great value of this bisocial view of morality is that it removes the issue from religious and philosophical debate and places it squarely in the realm of the pragmatic. Without denying the inherently subjective nature of our goals as human beings, we may be able to agree that one reasonable goal is the maximizing of happiness. The question is then, how do we educate people to understand that it is in all our best interests to nurture our innate tendencies toward compassion?" Conclusion. Throughout the reading, 2 past philosophers who Churchland consistently acknowledges as corresponding with her overall philosophical view of morality are Hume and Aristotle. Hume offered considerable insight with his understanding that the roots of morality are in our nature and not reason. And Aristotle hit the mark when he rejected a Platonic heaven where absolute moral truths reside, and instead placed morality in the realm of the practical. Now, in current times, we can add to their insights brain research, and this makes all of the difference. Instead of shying away from the topic of morality, as she did in her early days, Churchland has taken on morality as one of her main philosophical subjects. Altogether, Brain Trust is a marvelous book on a modern approach to morality. Just as Churchland advocates eliminative materialism to our folk psychology, so too does Churchland seem to promote an Occam's razor approach to this branch of philosophy. She shaves away an outdated and untestable view of morality, and in its place presents morality in a modern and enlightened perspective. Phi, A Voyage from the Brain to the Soul. Giulio Tononi. In Phi, Giulio Tononi explores consciousness in a very unusual way. While most books on this topic either offer technical details of neural anatomy that may allow for consciousness or philosophically scrutinize its overall meaning, this author approaches it as a story, and one told from the viewpoint of Galileo. Yet, unlike his usual role of objectively studying nature, here Galileo examines his own consciousness, and in a dreamlike, almost psychedelic way, he ventures on a journey to understand what it is all about. Along his way, Galileo goes in and out of conversations with others, and multiple analogies and stories are told. Perhaps Tononi's nomadic style makes sense, as this is what consciousness itself does, experiencing the world not as third person, but subjectively. The book starts off with Galileo laying down to rest, and wondering how many breaths he still has in him. Soon after, he enters into a hypnagogic state that almost seems to be an out-of-body experience. Tononi writes, "Then suddenly, straining to blow inside his body, the air took Galileo with it, and he felt his soul sucked inward, flowing through narrow nostrils inside the dark vault of the skull." As Galileo enters into a dreamlike state, he muses what gave rise to his awareness in the first place. Was it his brain? And if so, how could it generate consciousness? And would it all vanish at the time of death? Or was the source of consciousness his soul? Perhaps the whole objective world is really a product of consciousness itself. As Tononi puts it, he seemed to be of two minds on this issue. As the dream continues, Galileo meets three scientists, Francis Crick, Alan Turing, and Charles Darwin, who help him try to make sense of these philosophical quandaries. One wonders if perhaps the author drew his storyline in part from Dickens' Christmas Carol. When discussing these guides, Tononi points out in his notes, almost jokingly so, that all three are a bit too English, and perhaps a bit one-sided, but nonetheless have something significant to offer Galileo in his quest. The author thinly veils the name of each mentor, referring to Francis Crick as Frick, Alan Turing as Alturi, and Charles Darwin as the bearded old man. In a poetic and analogous form he maintains throughout his text, Tononi, in part 1 of the book, introduces the reader to Crick's position on consciousness. Besides his research on the structure of the DNA molecule, which eventually led him to winning the Nobel Prize in biochemistry, along with James Watson, Crick was deeply interested in the study of consciousness and wrote The Astonishing Hypothesis, the Scientific Search for the Soul. Crick, as Frick in the story, explains to Galileo that consciousness does indeed arise from the brain. More specifically, he argues that for consciousness to manifest, there must be an interactive loop, or communication, between the cerebrum and the thalamus. The neurons in the cerebrum communicating with the thalamus is called the corticothalamus complex. Instead of a prince or pope running the show, Crick continues to explain to Galileo that the cerebrum part of the brain acts as a democracy with many specialists contributing and cooperating with each other. Cells here are connected and conversing, and this is essential for awareness. Interestingly, even though the cerebellum, in Latin meaning the little brain responsible for motor control, may be more populated than the cerebrum in terms of cells, the neurons here do not talk to each other, but are isolated. As such, These particular brain cells do not account for consciousness, argues Crick. To make his understanding really come to life, Crick refers to the cerebrum and the cerebellum as two great cities living inside the brain. The cerebrum is a bustling metropolis where citizens argue, shout, and discuss. This pluralistic society allows its members to cast different votes, and all of this excitement plays a pivotal role in developing consciousness. The cerebellum, on the other hand, is like a silent prison where the citizens, though many, live in isolated cubicles, unable to talk. As such, Crick reminds Galileo one can damage the cerebellum yet still have consciousness. However, lesions or injuries, even small ones, in the cerebrum can cause great havoc, from loss of memory to epilepsy to even resulting in a loss of consciousness or death. Thus, for conscious awareness, Crick asserts, what ultimately matters then is how the neurons are connected, not necessarily how many one has in a particular region. In the next scene, Crick and Galileo come across a sleeping Frenchman. When Galileo shook him awake and asked him what was on his mind right before he woke up, the Frenchman shouted as though quite irritated, "Nothing is on my mind." Groggy and discontent, the Frenchman fell back asleep. As they observed him sleeping, Crick pointed out to Galileo that the Frenchman's eyes this time were moving back and forth as he slept, indicating he was dreaming. When the man was reawakened once again, this time he was not dopey, and he reported experiencing very vivid images in the sleep state. Utilizing an ocean analogy, Crick explains to Galileo what is going on in the different sleep segments. In deep sleep, the waves are deep and slow and uniform in the entire sea. As though under a totalitarian regime, there is no neuronal talk, and everyone follows the same orders or wave pattern. But when the man was in the dream state, the waves were more erratic, changing shape and momentum in a shallow sea. This means neuronal activity was strong, and as the neurons talked, so came awareness and imagery. Once fully awake, the Frenchman expressed his own views on consciousness. He stated that consciousness was there in sleep, in deep or dreaming states, and, more importantly, it will be there after death. In a defensive tone, he proclaimed, "Consciousness never expires, not even for a moment. What the brain does is immaterial. Consciousness uses it to communicate with the body, and through the body with the world. But consciousness is a different substance and does not need the brain to exist." At death, his consciousness will be one with God, the Frenchman opined. When Crick offered a counter-materialist view that matter alone generates consciousness, he then asked Galileo what was his take on it, to which Galileo remained silent. Many years ago, while finishing up my undergraduate studies at UC San Diego, I met Francis Crick at a dinner party at V.S. Ramachandran's house. Since I was only introduced to this guest as Francis, I was unaware that for over 2 hours I sat on the couch discussing the brain, consciousness, and the meaning of life with one of the great minds of the 20th century. As I recall, my 22-year-old self said some embarrassing statements, such as, "What do you do for a living, Francis?" and, "If you have nothing going on, perhaps you can help me out in the research lab sometime." To his great credit, he never let on who he was, though the grin on his face when I asked him these questions was priceless. While I look back upon that night with bittersweet memories, I feel very fortunate to have met Crick and to have been given an opportunity to hold a conversation with him similar to the one that the imaginary Galileo did in Tononi's book. In part 2 of the reading, Galileo's journey continues with Alan Turing, played by Alturi. In a conversation with Turing, phi, pronounced phi as in fly, and its significance in understanding consciousness is discussed. Presented as a symbol of an I with an O placed directly over it, phi is a mathematical symbol of the golden ratio, the right way of dividing something into parts. In the context of this book, phi refers to the information integrated by the whole above and beyond its parts. Call it integrated information. Thus, in this section, Turing proposes that the brain produces consciousness, since it can integrate information between all its specialized parts. an idea that seems to fit with Crick's analysis as well. Yet, in addition to this, according to the phi theory, consciousness can be understood as the whole that cannot be simply reduced to its parts. This idea Crick may take issue with. In a way, Tononi seems to be hinting that consciousness, being irreducible, can be understood here as an emergent property. Furthermore, as the story unfolds, Galileo learns that a complex is where phi reaches its maximum, and therein lives one consciousness, a single entity of experience, and that the human brain is such a complex. When pondering if other non-human beings also have consciousness, Tononi indicates yes, but their phi is to a lower degree. This matches to some degree the hierarchy of consciousness idea founded in Michio Kaku's Future of the Mind, wherein he too presents distinct levels of consciousness found in the natural world. However, some have argued that Tononi's position goes beyond recognizing consciousness in the animal world, and borders on panpsychism, especially when he suggests that a photodiode has a wisp of consciousness, and that a phi of a rock is low compared to that of a moth. And some may take exception when he argues that a human embryo's phi may be less than a fly's. Despite his critics, Tononi tackles consciousness from an interesting angle, as he acknowledges a world teeming with life and distinct levels of awareness. Finally, in the third section of the book, the old bearded man, aka Charles Darwin, is brought into the scene. This part of the reading is not so much about Darwinian evolution, but about reminding us that human consciousness continues to develop, to grow, and to evolve. What contributes to this is the integration of art, culture, and history into our awareness. Whether our individual consciousness survives us after death is unknown, but certainly one can argue that human consciousness as a whole continues after our death, and we contributed to developing that. So in this sense at least, we survive. Since this book is a bit difficult to follow, one may really appreciate the author's notes at the end of the chapter. In the notes, Tononi steps out of the dream to clue the reader in on what is going on, and to add some extra context and references. These notes are of extreme value in grasping the nuances of the text. Altogether, this book was an enjoyable, albeit challenging text on consciousness, reading more like a piece of literature than a science book. While the hard problem on the consciousness, explaining why and how we have qualia, may still be a mystery, Tononi's approach to the topic was indeed thought-provoking. Seeing Things as They Are. John Searle. Over the years, when I have been asked what I teach and my response is philosophy, I usually receive a deer-in-the-headlights look and then an instant change of the subject. I will never forget the time I mentioned to a fellow surfer in the water something about teaching philosophy, and he simply paddled away, as if I had a potentially infectious disease. Sometimes when I reveal my discipline, the person I am talking to reminisces about a past undergraduate philosophy course, only to follow it with a comment about how awful the class was. With a sour, disgruntled look, the person might recall how the professor would raise absurd ontological questions, such as, is there really a chair there, or am I just perceiving one? And how do I know when I see green, you are seeing green too? Perhaps you are seeing red and calling it green. From this fatigued response, I was not sure if the person who took the course was simply bored, did not follow the logic of it, or felt that erudite topics of philosophy offered no pragmatic purpose. My husband David, who also teaches philosophy, encounters the same feedback, and so has resorted to simply saying that he teaches science. This is no hyperbole, as he focuses on the latest scientific understandings of reality, arguing in fact that philosophy done well is science, and philosophy done poorly is just philosophy. He sometimes ends this with, philosophy done poorly is theology, when he is in a more daring mood. From our experiences, philosophy seems to have gotten a bad rap from the general public. And this is indeed unfortunate, as this area of study offers so much to the inquiring mind. Our curriculum includes many engrossing topics, such as religion, atheism, agnosticism, and theism. Science, evolution, quantum physics, cosmology, and neuroscience. Politics, socialism, communism, and democracy. The future, artificial intelligence and biotechnology. Ethics, from animal rights to stem cell research, etc. The subject matter of philosophy is the human being, as the philosopher Donald Palmer succinctly put, and so anything related to us, our beliefs, our ethics, our biology, our planet, the multiverse, are part of the philosophical conversation. How can this be anything but truly fascinating? So what is it about philosophy that garners this glassy-eyed, nobody-is-home reaction, or even a rude, I do not want to know you glare? When I read John Searle's new book, Seeing Things as They Are, A Theory of Perception, I must confess I sort of got it. Let me explain. If one with no philosophical background, or even a slight one, were to pick up the text from the local bookstore, it most likely would be a very hard read, as it seems to assume a great deal of background knowledge in the subject. Though I am aware of the terms and thinkers within the reading, the average reader is not, and I imagine that those who venture into its pages are quite overwhelmed how abstract it all is. Moreover, Searle on occasion takes a slightly condescending tone in his presentation, implying that those who do not agree with him owe us an alternative diagram, and further aggravating the reader by saying, why would anyone in his or her right mind want to reject his overall thesis? I think his most patronizing line, however, was when he declares that for those who do not accept his view, then there really is nothing more to be said, because you cannot understand conscious perception. Perhaps those who disparage philosophy sense this I know more than you attitude among philosophers, and this contributes to philosophy's poor standing in the social arena, and why it receives a cold shoulder. Searle's direct realism. Although, with all of this said, for those willing to tackle somewhat abstruse philosophical material presented with a razor-sharp approach, Searle's text does offer the reader a fascinating look at ontology, the study of the nature of being or reality, and epistemology, namely our knowledge or perceptions of it. What Searle accomplishes here is a new take on these age-old topics. In his text, Searle proposes what he calls direct realism, the argument that there is indeed a real world out there that we perceive. Now this may sound to those without any philosophical training obvious and perhaps inane. Utilizing what seems to be common sense, one might state, when I sit in a chair, I am really sitting in a chair, and not just thinking I am sitting in a chair. But since Descartes from the 17th century, Searle actually argues it goes back to the ancients, but Descartes popularized it, philosophers have more or less rejected that there is a real objective world out there independent of the observer. Searle states that Descartes, Locke, Berkeley, Leibniz, Spinoza, Hume, Kant, Mill, Hegel, and contemporary philosophers as well, all seem to have made a huge mistake, a fallacy of sorts, which the author calls the bad argument. This monumental error is supposing that we never directly perceive objects and states of affairs in the world, but directly perceive only our subjective experiences. According to Searle, Descartes' dualism, Locke's representational realism, Hume's skepticism, and Berkeley's idealism all miss the mark when it comes to ontology and a theory of perception. What they seemed to lack was the understanding that we are directly seeing objects, and that these have an existence totally independent of our perceptions. There is a real world out there, and that we can access it, not just represent it, as Locke contended. It does not cease to exist when we are not perceiving it, challenging Berkeley's view, and causality is a part of it, despite Hume's position that we cannot infer causation. Searle repeats within the text that we live in a sea of experienced causation, and perceptual experiences are caused by their objects. His bold statement, my paraphrase, that reality is not dependent on experience, but the opposite is true, captures the essence of the book. Unlike his philosophical predecessors, Searle not only argues that there is a world out there, but he asserts that our perceptions more or less match this external reality, and through shared language we can express this. Our perceptions are not just sense data, mental images, or imprints that can have significant variation. Rather, we can have direct awareness of the physical properties of an object. Of course, one may interpret the object one is seeing in a certain way different than how another interprets it. But the object itself, being viewed, can be seen as is. Art serves as a prime example. Though Searle sees the same work of art as Goethe, both interpret the message within a painting quite differently. All of this means that the world is out there. We can witness it as is, but how it plays in our psyche can vary a bit. Throughout the book, Searle discusses the idea of intentionality and admits that for some philosophers it is a controversial claim. He explains that the ontologically objective object causes an ontologically subjective experience. One can think of this as the world-to-mind phenomenon. But this is only half of the equation, he says. There is also the mind-to-world aspect that needs to be considered. The object experienced satisfied certain conditions and causes intentional or mental states, and this he calls intentionality. It is the feature of the mind by which it is directed at, or about, or of objects and states of affairs in the world. Searle posits there is an internal connection between raw phenomenology of the perceptional experiences and the conditions of satisfaction set by those perceptional experiences. Searle's direct realism is fairly different from Locke's representative realism. According to representative realism, there is a distinction of primary and secondary qualities. Primary qualities of an object are in the objects themselves. It is the object's weight, length, motion, etc., and it is through sight and touch that we experience them. Secondary qualities such as color, smell, and taste are not in the objects themselves and so can vary dramatically from person to person. Though Locke offers an astute assessment here, even Searle says there is something to the distinction. He does not take the next and necessary step that the world is accessible to us directly. Instead, Locke suggests that our minds, like a camera, take a picture of the world, and so our images resemble or represent reality, but are not it. Being one big step removed from reality, as Locke's ontological scheme is, marks the substantial difference between representational realism and direct realism. Having the ability to directly perceive physical phenomena may play a very significant role helping us navigate our way in this world, according to Searle. He hints at an evolutionary explanation here. With these rich visual capabilities, it allows the organism to cope with their environment in spectacularly successful ways. In one section of the reading, he states it thus: "From a biological and evolutionary point of view, the phenomenology of perception must relate us directly to the world perceived." Einstein versus Bohr. Interestingly, this question of whether there is a world apart from our perceptions of it brings to mind the nearly century-old debate between Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr. Einstein supported realism, arguing much like Searle that there is an objective world free of human intervention. The moon is there even if he did not see it, Einstein opined. That we can access the truths of this objective reality was what he based his science on, especially in his search for grand, unified theory connecting the four known forces of the universe together. Bohr, on the other hand, argued just the opposite, that realism is a fiction. In fact, even more astonishingly, Bohr claimed that reality appeared to us depending on the devices we use to measure it, and so the observer, in fact, altered reality. Quantum physics seemed to support this view. Practical realism. As a philosopher, when handling ontological and epistemological questions, I lean toward the position of Socratic ignorance, that ultimately I can never know reality, whether there is an external one or whether it appears to be there since I perceive it to be. However, this does not mean that realism should be entirely rejected. When I walk into a room and sit in what appears to be an empty chair, chair analogies somehow get a lot of attention in philosophy. It is common sense that once I occupy this chair, others will not perceive it to be vacant and try to sit in it. Pragmatically, though not necessarily ontologically, realism makes great sense. Thus, instead of direct realism, perhaps we can embrace a softer form of it in practical realism. All this means is that the world I perceive and the one you do is more or less the same, not considering cases of hallucination or illusion. And this certainly helps us function in the world. One might even hint at the claim that the world has an ontological existence independent of our perceptions, as Einstein suggested, and that our brains have evolved to understand it. Yet, practical realism stops short from asserting the truth of that final statement. All we really know is that our perceptions help us pilot through reality, whatever that is. Conclusion. Overall, as we can see, Searle works hard to challenge the bad argument. Whether 4 centuries of poor thinking is corrected, however, remains to be seen. Regardless of where one stands on this ontological and epistemological issue, Searle no doubt got the conversation going once more, offering a new take on a well-established philosophical problem. Though Searle's book may not be an easy read for many, it certainly offered a worthwhile philosophical topic to investigate, and one which Einstein and Bohr would undoubtedly appreciate. The Cambridge Handbook of Artificial Intelligence. Keith Frankish and William M. Ramsey. While computer technology has no doubt become more progressive, the question remains whether we will one day have full-blown artificial intelligence. The idea that we can actually create a being that may have consciousness and far surpass our own intelligence is astounding. But the ramifications of such a creation, whether it be our saving grace or demise, are still unknown to us. Many argue that since an AI explosion is in the very near future, and it can so radically transform our lives, we should be diligently addressing all topics related to AI. The Cambridge Handbook of Artificial Intelligence, edited by Keith Frankish and William M. Ramsey, does just that. The text explores many AI topics from a variety of angles, including computer and cognitive science perspectives and philosophical and ethics ones. Though the editors make a point that this guide's main focus is comprehending the latest in AI research and the theoretical issues of that research, many of the essays are written by philosophers of the mind who raise important philosophical issues such as, are machines conscious? And what do we mean by that? Can they be programmed to be ethical? And what does the future hold in light of AI? The text is broken up into 4 main sections. The foundations, an examination of AI accomplishments, research areas, and philosophical roots. Architectures, an understanding of good old-fashioned AI or GOFAI, connectionism, and neural networks, embedded cognition, etc. Dimensions, an investigation of different dimensions of intelligence from learning to emotion to consciousness, etc. And lastly, extensions, highlighting the world of robotics, artificial life, and the ethical aspects of AI. The 15 articles that make up these sections are standalone pieces with often overlapping material. For instance, John Searle's famous Chinese room argument is discussed in several of its articles. In the beginning chapter, Stan Franklin walks the reader through the key moments in AI, including Alan Turing's significant contributions and the offering of the Loebner Prize of $100,000 to the first program able to pass the Turing test. An award still waiting to be declared, but I suspect it will be claimed in the very near future. We learn here that the reference AI was coined shortly after Turing in the 1950s by John McCarthy, who worked at Dartmouth at the time but later at MIT and then Stanford. The author explores many fascinating events of AI history, including the moment machine learning was born, with Arthur Samuel's checker playing program, and the case of Deep Blue beating the chess champion Garry Kasparov, and Watson defeating champions on the game Jeopardy! In poetic form, the writer declares that in the second decade of the 21st century, AI is emerging out of an AI winter, with some progress being made, to an AI spring and maybe even an AI summer, with major accomplishments on their way. Franklin's article is followed by a couple of essays which explore the philosophical aspects of AI, asking the profound question, what is it to have a mind, and whether computers will possess them? The authors review noted philosophical positions within the field, including Daniel Dennett's strong AI position that consciousness is substrate neutral, and so computers modeled after the human brain can have awareness. This is challenged by Hubert Dreyfus's critique that AI will not match human intelligence. Unlike computers, humans' thinking is non-algorithmic, or rule-oriented. A similar argument was made by Roger Penrose. Dreyfus asserts, our ability to understand the world and other people is a non-declarative type of know-how skill that is not amenable to GOFAI propositional codification. It is inarticulate, preconceptual, and has an indispensable phenomenological dimension that cannot be captured by any rule-based system. Another objection to strong AI comes from John Searle. According to his weak AI position, there is no qualia for the computer, as there is for the human mind. Computers, he says, simulate conscious understanding, but do not have it. To demonstrate this, Searle devised the Chinese room thought experiment. Imagine you are in a closed room and trying to communicate in Chinese with one outside the room. To do so, you slide under the door frame questions in Chinese. On the other side of the door, the recipient slides the correct answers to the questions back to you. From your perspective, you may think that you are communicating with a real Chinese speaker who understands Chinese. But in truth, according to this thought experiment, you are communicating with a computer, which is simply manipulating syntactical symbols but not understanding their meaning or semantical content. In a similar vein, another thought experiment also mentioned in the reading is Ned Block's China Brain thought experiment. As a criticism of machine functionalism, in this thought experiment, one is asked to imagine that the entire population of China acted like a human mind for 60 minutes. If functionalism is correct, then one would expect that if the human mind was simulated perfectly, with individual citizens acting as neurons, connected in just the right way, then a conscious mind would emerge out of this. But, as Block points out, this is absurd. Despite some philosophical objections that strong AI awaits our future, other articles investigate evidence for it and the amazing strides made in AI research. One such area is machine learning, perhaps one of the most rapidly growing areas of computer science. Another area of research is developing artificial agents that may be able to experience and express emotions. Though we face the other mind's problem, that is, not being able to know the internal states of another, or if there are internal states, we encounter the same problem for humans. If the right kind of architecture is implemented for emotion as it is for the human brain, then there is no reason to argue conscious emotions cannot be experienced in AI. If one takes a substrate-independent view, then simulating the physics of the brain well enough can allow for consciousness and emotional states. In one of the chapters in the last section of the book, promising lines of research in robotics are investigated. For instance, interfacing technology with neural tissue may allow for prosthetics to be controlled by the brain. Perhaps even more fascinating is the possibility of creating hybrid machines, or robots with biological matter in their control systems. Whether digital electronics are put in our brains, or whether some of our organic matter is placed in the robot, future robotics, it is predicted, will become as commonplace as computers are on every desk. Furthermore, artificial life research, hard artificial life of autonomous robots, wet artificial life of test tubes and creating artificial cells from living and non-living materials, and soft artificial life of computer simulations or digital constructions, is elucidated. whether we can create life synthetically, and whether software systems can be alive raises profound philosophical concerns. Creating such life forms place us in uncharted ethical terrain. One of the most enlightening articles in the text that deals with the subject of ethics is Nick Bostrom's and Eliezer Yudkowsky's The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. The authors evaluate important ethical issues, such as preventing machines from harming humans and the world at large, and also considering the moral status of machines themselves. For AI to be built to act safely and ethically, it needs to have general intelligence and not be simply task-specific. Artificial General Intelligence, or AGI, will be able to foresee the consequences of millions of different actions across domains. Additionally, to determine whether a machine should have moral status, we need to ask if the machine has both sentience, qualia, and sapience, or personhood. If these are established, conceivably one should not discriminate morally against it. According to the principle of ontogeny non-discrimination, if two beings have the same functionality and the same consciousness experience, and differ only in how they came into existence, then they have the same moral status. We apply this reasoning to humans created in vitro fertilization, and would presumably to humans if they were created as clones, and so reasonably we should likewise bring it into play when creating artificial cognitive systems. In this same article there is a fascinating section on whole brain emulation, or uploading the human brain onto a digital computer. To do this, one may have to destroy the original organic matter as it is dissected into thin slices in order to capture all of its neuronal connections. Once a precise three-dimensional map of the brain is achieved, then this can be uploaded to a powerful computer, and the new digital brain may have consciousness as the old one did. Either this new brain can live in a virtual reality or be connected to a robotic body and live in the external world. In this discussion, the writers raise the issue that artificial minds may experience subjective time very differently than we do. 4 years of objective time to us may be experienced by a fast AI as a millennia of subjective time. The principle of subjective rate of time is introduced here. In cases where the duration of an experience is of basic normative significance, it is the experience's subjective duration that counts. In this context, then, if a fast AI and a human were both in pain, it may be morally relevant to alleviate the pain the AI experiences before one helps the human. Or, in another case, if an upload committed a crime and it was sentenced to 2 years in prison, we would have to ask if this should be 2 objective years, experienced subjectively as a very, very long time at the fast AI level, or 2 subjective years, for us, just a couple of days. Many of these same philosophical and ethical concerns are also addressed in Sam Harris's podcast, The Light of the Mind, in which Harris interviews philosopher David Chalmers. In the last 40 minutes of the almost 2-hour podcast, the conversation turns to AI. Chalmers did his PhD at an AI lab at Indiana University, and so AI research has been a particular interest of his. While he has spent a great deal of his career as a philosopher on the hard problem of consciousness, subjective, first-person states of awareness, more recently he has focused his energy on whether AI can experience such an internal state. Known for taking a non-reductionist view, Chalmers argues that consciousness cannot be explained by standard physical processes. He claims that something needs to be added to the picture, such as new properties or an enriched physics in a panpsychic way. With this view, some label him an innocent dualist. Nonetheless, he entertains that AI can have consciousness much like us. Ultimately, Chalmers argues there are 2 ways AI research can go. In one scenario, we become these superintelligent creatures by enhancing and augmenting ourselves or uploading ourselves via reverse engineering. Once we have cracked the neural code, we can replace our brain with durable computer parts and perhaps a new artificial body as well. Wisely, Chalmers suggests a gradual upgrade, one neuron replaced by one silicon chip at a time, and that one stay awake during the procedure to ensure consciousness stays en route. If lights start to go out in the procedure, then it can be stopped before it is too late. Supposing that it is successful, the question remains, will this be me or simply a copy or twin type of me? When we ask the silicon beings if they are the original, of course they may try to convince us they are, but we would really have no way of knowing if this was the case. If we want to live virtually with no meat body, we can reverse engineer our brains and upload them onto computers. Yet an obvious ethical question arises out of this. If you delete an uploaded self, are you committing murder? Chalmers contends that if there is consciousness, or what appears to be, then this being is in our moral circle of concern. On a personal note, at the end of the interview, Chalmers expresses his hope that in his lifetime he will one day be able to upload himself. With this, immortality may possibly be achieved. In another storyline, according to Chalmers, superintelligent beings are not like us, and these new superintelligence AI may destructively take over the world, gobbling up our resources and eliminating anything that stands in its way, as Nick Bostrom in Superintelligence also speculates. Since AI may have the ability to mass reproduce, making copies of themselves, and each successor system may be more intelligent than the prior one, these smarter minds may pose greater risks to overall well-being. Of course, it is also possible that they offer great benefits. Sam Harris interjects that, with their far superior intelligence, they may trample us as we do an anthill. With all of this said, in a 100 years' time, when we may be in full-blown AI summer, the world may seem unrecognizable to us. Superintelligent, conscious machines, humans with silicon chip brains and robotic bodies, or uploaded human consciousness, and even possibly teletransportation may be the norm. Since the tide of AI is rising, this is the time we should focus our efforts in setting up game rules and ethical standards, helping to create a friendly future before it is too late. The Transhumanist Reader. Max Moore and Natasha Vita Moore. Instead of viewing the human body as a final product, having reached the ultimate goal of rational thought, many philosophers throughout history have posited that humans are on a continuous journey of self-improvement, with much more potential ahead. Aristotle's teleology, the idea that life forms continue to evolve along a goal-directed path, captures this point. Aristotle suggested humankind can further develop one's emotional, moral, and intellectual self by pursuing a life of great virtue or excellence, moral and intellectual arete. Moreover, many religions, such as the Buddhist school of thought and the Gnostics of the early Christian era, have also argued for the idea of self-betterment. These traditions petition human beings to wake up to a higher, more supreme level. And especially in the case of Buddhism, enlightenment as such is not necessarily otherworldly, but a state of awareness one can maintain while in this world. Perhaps no past philosopher has represented the idea of self-improvement and self-actualization more brilliantly than Nietzsche. The exalted Übermensch, Overman or Superman, is one who has evolved to the very pinnacle of human possibilities, and serves as a model for others to emulate. According to Nietzsche, the Übermensch is a lover of knowledge who holds a non-hostile view of life, seeing Earth as home. This free and creative spirit does not follow the herd, harbors no resentment or guilt, recuperates from life's blows, and sees one's enemies as one's allies. Conquering nihilism, the individual can be transformed into this mature being. In a way, one can think of Nietzsche's Übermensch as a post-human, one who has ascended to the very height of the human potential, so much so that one is almost unrecognizable to the rest. While Nietzsche's Übermensch is certainly a character to deeply admire, such a creature actually may pale in comparison to what modern-day transhumanists envision for humanity. Like humanism, this 20th to 21st century movement emphasizes the Enlightenment principles of rationality, science, individual rights, and progress for the advancement of the human race. However, transhumanism, often abbreviated as H+, does not stop there. It proposes the idea that humans can hope to attain much more than what humanists, and maybe even Nietzsche, sought. Imagine, they say, a world where diseases did not exist. Death was put off indefinitely. The emotional state of compassion and moral integrity were maximized, and human cognition reached its peak. Living healthy, very long lives with exceptional intelligence, transhumanists proclaim, can be attained via technological advancement, through either augmenting the human brain and body or through whole brain emulation, WBE. Consciousness can be preserved and awareness significantly enhanced. And with nanotechnology, which includes nanomedicine and nanorobotics, illnesses may be beat. Even cryonics, freezing one immediately after death to be brought back to life when technology is caught up, is explored in transhumanist circles. And all of this is just a part of their daring and imaginative vision. In this new stage of human existence, space exploration and colonization will possibly be the norm, and AI-conscious beings will most likely share the planet with us. Setting up safeguards for programming benign traits is of course essential. It makes sense that Ray Kurzweil's singularity finds a home in this movement. Though transhumanism has roots that go back to the 1950s with Julian Huxley's world, the term being used to capture a specific movement was first coined in 1990 by Max Moore, editor with Natasha Vita-Moore of the Transhumanist Reader. Their 2013 Reader is a collection of 42 articles broken up into 9 distinct parts. Within its pages, the many contributors clarify transhumanist philosophy and correct misconceptions about it. In Moore's essay in the text, he addresses 4 major misconceptions about transhumanism. First of all, he clarifies that transhumanists do not seek to create perfect humans or a utopian society. Rather than seeking a finalized stage, the goal is continual improvement and perpetual change and progress. The more human beings advance, the greater opportunities arise for further development. Hence, it is ongoing. Reminiscent of Aristotle's telos for human beings, Ronald Bailey asserted within his article in the text that being stronger, healthier, and smarter would more likely aid a person in her pursuit of virtue and moral excellence. And along this path, we can continue to develop. Second of all, Moore explains that transhumanism is not about predicting schedules in the future. Although there have been some attempts to speculate where we are heading and when, such as Kurzweil's prediction that singularity will occur by 2045, the main focus is on pursuing a general direction of progress, with core transhumanist values and goals. Overall, throughout the reading, the future is painted in a very optimistic light. This runs counter to some futurist predictions, such as Bill Joy's article in Wired magazine about all of the dangers that may lie ahead, or Nick Bostrom's superintelligence text, which entertains a villainous AI scenario in the future, although Bostrom has a somewhat playful article in this book on why I want to be a post-human when I grow up, pointing out it is very good for us to become post-human. Transhumanists understand that misuse of technology can certainly occur, as Kurzweil's essay in the Reader indicates, so making defensive guidelines now should be one of society's top priorities. Thirdly, transhumanists do not despise their biological bodies, but rather seek to improve them, making them resistant to aging, damage, and disease, and by enhancing its sense and sharpening the cognition of our biological brains. In the last section of the book, Moore offers a tongue-in-cheek letter to Mother Nature, highlighting the flaws in the engineering of the human body, and offering her 7 suggested amendments: stopping aging and death, expanding perceptual range with technology, improving memory and intelligence, developing refined emotions, etc. These amendments to the human constitution can be made through nanotechnology. Furthermore, morphological freedom of any kind, whether one's consciousness is fully uploaded, if one is living a life with an artificial body, or if one has transformed oneself into a post-gender being, etc., is championed in this movement. According to Anders Sandberg's article, self-creation is an ancient drive in the human, and expressing it is a right. And it is emphasized this is a right for all, not just the elite in society. Some fear that transhumanist objectives will be allowed only for the few, the extremely wealthy and politically connected. But Damien Broderick assures the reader in his essay that this is not anyway part of the transhumanist plan. Extended life and enhancement are for everyone who wish to pursue it. The last misunderstanding that Moore discusses is the claim that transhumanists fear death. He challenges this by stating that death itself is not seen as sinister, but a painful, prolonged one is. Since death is the end of growth and experience overcoming it is preferable. If indeed death is inevitable for an individual, perhaps before death the mind can be copied and then resurrected. Or perhaps, if the human mind is already living in a synthetic simulation, it can continue on in new, fascinating realities. Understandably, many religions, especially Western-based ones, would most likely reject transhumanist values, as these religions see the spiritual afterlife and not earthly objectives as the primary goal. But in a way, one can argue that both the religious mind and the transhumanists share a common ground. Both seek continuance in a more pleasant reality. Nonetheless, the majority of transhumanists, though certainly not all, do not identify with a religious group. In one of the essays in the text, Marvin Minsky confesses his own atheistic worldview, and it seems that this is not an unusual stance among authors of this book. Altogether, the transhumanist reader offers a remarkable and uplifting look at where the world may be heading. So often an apocalyptic doom and gloom picture is painted when the future is broached, as Armageddon scenes of the end of the world fill the imagination and invoke paralyzing fear. How refreshing it is to read a text that instead portrays a courageous, positive worldview of the future. With enthusiasm and hope, transhumanists seek to create a better self, a transitional human whose use of technology, way of living, and values mark them as a step toward post-humanity. Surely one can argue that Nietzsche would be proud. The Transhumanist Declaration, 2012. 1. Humanity stands to be profoundly affected by science and technology in the future. We envision the possibility of broadening human potential by overcoming aging, cognitive shortcomings, involuntary suffering, and our confinement to planet Earth. 2. We believe that humanity's potential is still mostly unrealized. There are possible scenarios that lead to wonderful and exceedingly worthwhile enhanced human conditions. 3. We recognize that humanity faces serious risks, especially from the misuse of new technologies. There are possible realistic scenarios that lead to the loss of most or even all of what we hold valuable. Some of these scenarios are drastic, others are subtle. Although all progress is change, not all change is progress. 4. Research effort needs to be invested into understanding these prospects. We need to carefully deliberate how best to reduce risks and expedite beneficial applications. We also need forums where people can constructively discuss what could be done, and a social order where responsible decisions can be implemented. 5. Reduction of risks of human extinction and development of means for the preservation of life and health, the alleviation of grave suffering, and the improvement of human foresight and wisdom be pursued as urgent priorities and generously funded. 6. Policymaking ought to be guided by responsible and inclusive moral vision. taking seriously both opportunities and risks, respecting autonomy and individual rights, and showing solidarity with and concern for the interests and dignity of all people around the globe. We must also consider our moral responsibilities towards generations that will exist in the future. 7. We advocate the well-being of all sentients, including humans, non-human animals, and any future artificial intellects, modified life forms, or other intelligences to which technological and scientific advance may give rise. 8. We favor morphological freedom, the right to modify and enhance one's body, cognition, and emotions. This freedom includes the right to use or not to use techniques and technologies to extend life, preserve the self through cryonics, uploading, and other means, and to choose further modifications and enhancements.